I want to welcome everyone to the Budget Committee today. Today's hearing will focus on CBO's new budget and economic outlook, which was released on Tuesday. Our witness is CBO's Director Doug Elmendorf, I might say, very distinguished director. And I want to say how much I appreciate the work of the Congressional Budget Office, how credible I find it to be, how transparent I find it to be. And look, sometimes they strenuously disagree with me. I remember very well in healthcare, my major initiative, CBO critiqued very heavily. So that's the way it should be. Now, not that my proposal should have been critiqued as heavily as it was, but that's the way it works. That's why they have credibility, and they have credibility on both sides, because they tell it the way they see it. And that's really absolutely critical to the process. We've got to have some independent scorekeeper here. Are they always right? No. This is the work of men and women, and none of us are perfect. So no, their work is not perfect. It'd be impossible to have any entity on matters of this complexity be completely right every time. But they are independent, they are credible, they are serious people, and they're doing very important work for all of us. So Director Elmendorf, welcome back to the committee. I want to thank you again for the outstanding work that you and your team have been doing, and with an extraordinarily heavy workload. Really extraordinarily heavy. I believe you're leading CBO in an incredibly challenging time and have absolutely risen to the occasion. As I say, many times I disagree. I make my disagreements known. Sometimes you react to that. Most of the times you don't. That's fine. And I think Senator Sessions would say the same thing, that you guys play it straight. I want to begin by highlighting what I believe are the key finding in CBO's report. This first chart depicts the 10-year budget outlook under CBO's new alternative fiscal scenario. It shows the deficit falling to $1.1 trillion in 2012, continuing to fall through 2015, and then rising through the latter half of the decade, reaching $1.5 trillion in 2022. We cannot permit that to happen. Please, colleagues, let's find a way to get this country back on track. We can do better than this. We are better than this. And we've got an absolute obligation to try to find a way to come together to get this country back on track. It's important to note that most of the increased deficit over the next 10 years under CBO's alternative fiscal scenario can be attributed to tax policies, not spending policies. Specifically, we can see that $6.4 trillion of the increased deficit under the scenario can be attributed to the extension of the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts, alternative minimum tax relief, other tax extenders, and related debt service. In comparison, only $1.5 trillion of the increased deficit under the scenario can be attributed to spending policies, including extending the so-called doc fix, that is the reimbursement rate for doctors who treat Medicare patients, reversing the sequester required by the Budget Control Act, and again, related debt service, that is the interest savings that applies to those policies. Under the alternative fiscal scenario, gross federal debt is expected to reach 103% of gross domestic product this year, and then continue rising to 120% of GDP by 2022. Let me just indicate, Greece is about 140% of GDP on their debt, their sovereign debt. Many economists regard anything above the 90% threshold as the danger zone. And as disturbing as those near-term deficits and debt are, the long-term outlook is even more dire. In addition to our budget outlook, I look forward to Director Elmendorf's views on the state of the economy. I believe there are some positive signs we're now seeing for the economy. For example, we've experienced 22 consecutive months of private sector job growth. That's good. The unemployment rate has come down. That's good. We've seen 10 consecutive quarters of real GDP growth. That's good. Housing starts are up 25% since December of 2010. Consumer confidence is showing signs of improvement. U.S. auto manufacturers are returning to profitability and reported very strong sales in January. And state revenues are showing modest signs of improvement. But we cannot become complacent. Please, let no one take my reference to some positive indicators that we have solved these problems. There are serious risks out there to fuller economic recovery. Unemployment remains far too high and threatens to undermine consumer confidence. Housing continues to pose a threat, as we heard in yesterday's hearing, with too many homes still in foreclosure or underwater, with people owing more on the house than the house is worth. The political deadlock in Washington could block key measures. Federal, state, and local budget cuts could add to near-term fiscal drag. And the European debt and fiscal crisis is creating uncertainty and threatening U.S. exports and threatening to pull us into recession as Europe heads into recession. I hope Director Elmendorf will comment on these positive signs and the risks to the economy in his testimony. I believe we need a policy that stresses both the fragility of the near-term economy and the need for long-term debt reduction. Let me say that again. My personal strong belief is we got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to take steps now to give additional lift to the economy. What I'm hearing from business is the problem with their deploying the $2 trillion on their balance sheets is a lack of demand. A lack of demand. Thin order books. So the Federal Reserve Chairman made very clear in his testimony before the Joint Economic Committee last fall, and let me quote from it, "Our crucial objective is to achieve long-run fiscal sustainability. The federal budget is clearly not on a sustainable path at present. A second important objective is to avoid fiscal actions that could impede the ongoing economic recovery." So, in the short term, we need more steps to strengthen the economy. In the medium and longer term, we need credible, serious action to address the debt threat. The first two objectives are certainly not incompatible, although to some people's ears they sound incompatible. Putting in place a credible plan for reducing future deficits over the longer term does not preclude attending to the implications of fiscal choices for the recovery in the near term. That, again, is a direct quote from the Chairman of the Federal Reserve. I believe he has it right. We must find a way to come together on a comprehensive and balanced plan to put our long-term fiscal house in order. That is critically important. At the same time, we must be careful not to take steps that could create additional fiscal drag in the near term, pushing us toward recession. That would make our deficit and debt situation worse, as our friends in England are finding out. There, they put austerity measures in place, and their economic growth is slipping, and slipping markedly, and making their deficit and debt situation worse. Let's not repeat that mistake. That's why I believe it is so important that we extend the payroll tax cut, emergency unemployment benefits through the rest of this year, and perhaps even more important, that we engage in a Rebuild America plan to strengthen the infrastructure, because we not only have fiscal deficit, we have an infrastructure deficit in this country. And anybody that doesn't believe it, just go out on I-95 here in Washington, D.C. after 3:30 in the afternoon. That's why I believe it is so important we extend, as I said before, the payroll tax cut and emergency unemployment benefits, and put together a Build America plan to invest in infrastructure. By the way, Chairman Bernanke has made clear that he believes we ought to be thinking seriously about additional investments in infrastructure at this time. It's a twofer. Not only do you get increased demand at a time of weak demand, but right now you can get very good prices. And it improves the competitive position of the United States. We have had report after report that our infrastructure will not allow us to be fully competitive. And if you doubt that, go to China and see what they're doing with infrastructure.